Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Ride the Six Motorcycle channel. This is part 3 of the Yamaha FZ6R Fork Rebuild. I managed to get a hold of a 41mm fork seal driver from my buddy. So I've got the tools now that I need to kind of start assembling all these forks back together. In case you aren't familiar, these tools can be quite expensive. They range anywhere from about $50 to $80 here in Canada, plus tax and shipping and whatnot. So they can be pricey, but this is the right tool for the job. So stay tuned, guys. We're going to get all these forks back together. You can still see everything's in pieces. I have washed most of the parts of the inner forks, like soap and water. I've kind of washed everything out, cleaned it all up. I will also be wiping it down again as we start the fork rebuild process with, I'm going to say some brake cleaner or something like that, like something nice and that'll really clean everything off properly. Alright guys, stay tuned. Let's get these forks built and let's get them back on the bike. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to do, this is the very bottom of the fork. This is what they call the oil flow stopper. We're going to just spray these with some brake fluid. Or not brake fluid, sorry, brake cleaner. And we're just going to give them a little clean again. The cleaner you can get these parts, guys, the better. Just because once it goes in there, it's in there for a while. So let's get them as clean as possible. Alright, so now that those are clean, the first thing that goes into your fork tube is that oil flow stopper. It does sit in a little groove at the very bottom, so you want to make sure that it's actually seated properly. So let's just stand that fork up there for a second. Next thing we want to clean is our little dampening rod. Okay, so we have our dampening rod cleaned off. Now, when you insert this back into your inner fork, it's a good idea to put a little bit of lube on it. So we're just going to use a little bit of the fork fluid that I bought. We're just going to lube up around, essentially around the seal here, around the guide. We're just going to get this thing nice and oiled up so we don't have any issues. Let's clean off our fork tube, especially down around the bushing area. Okay, slowly drop this in. The best way to do it is to keep your fork on an angle, but not such a steep angle where it just slams down to the bottom. Just gently. Okay, there we go. So, back into the other fork tube. Gently. So, it's time to start tightening in the dampening rod. Now, you're going to have the same problem tightening it as you did loosening it. Remember, I used the air impact gun. Tightening it, it's only supposed to be tightened to about 17 foot-pounds of torque. So I've made something to just kind of hold the inner rod, which is essentially, it's like a piece of a broom handle or an old mop handle that I've cut down. And I'm going to use the plastic piece and insert into the fork to hold the dampening rod on this side. So now you need to turn the fork upside down. And your fork's going to slide out. So now in order to tighten this bolt, we want to put a bit of pressure. The whole point is to put a bit of pressure on the inside dampening rod so that we can actually tighten this bolt. They also recommend that you put a new crush washer on this bolt. They're not very expensive. They're like maybe $2-3 a piece. And they also recommend that you put some Loctite on this bolt. Probably tons. I don't know, guys. I never know how much Loctite to use. There is no set amount. I have my Allen T handle here as well. Oh, there we go. Okay, it did just tighten up. Let's put the let's put the torque wrench on it again. I don't even know if I can torque it, but let's see. Okay, guys, so your outer tube bushing, the washer. Now there's a rough side and a smooth side. The rough side actually goes downward on the fork. And with that washer in place, we can actually use the fork seal driver here. And we can actually hit the washer and try to drive down the shim, the bushing. I know this is going to be very, very hard to see. I'm going to kind of show you right down the fork if I can. So I'm going to show you right down the fork, but more per se in here. When your bushing comes flush with the rest of the fork, it's in the whole way. Guys, I think our bushings are good. I've used the driver to pound both of them down with the washer as well. And I can see it's flat with the other part of the fork. So if I was to get a tool down in there or a little screwdriver, like, you would feel that it's not raised in relation to the rest of the fork. It's actually a little bit below, or it's sitting flush. So our inner tube bushing has been seated properly just using the fork tool. Let's get to the next part, and the next part is going to be your fork seal. This is the part where you need your Yamaha OEM fork seal kit or an aftermarket kit. Part number is 5VU-W003B-00. So it's a kit that includes 2 dust shields for your forks, 2 new dust shields, and 2 new basically oil seals for your forks. So it's time to do the oil seals. So let's open these up. So these are also known as the fork seals of your bike. So when you hear, oh, I blew up my fork seals were leaking, this is the next component that goes in the forks, and they require replacing. They do want you to cover the top of the fork with a plastic bag. Essentially, I'm using some cling wrap or some cellophane. And here's our new fork seal. We're just going to wet it up with a little bit of the fork oil. Writing side goes up on your fork seal, and the side that has like an indentation is the down side. So writing side up. Let's get it over the fork. Okay, there we go. And let's slide it down. Okay, now you can push this in a little bit with your hands, but it's probably not going to seat fully until you use the fork seal driver. So I'm just pushing it in with my fingers so that it sits flush. Second fork, throw the ring on. Let's put another little piece of cellophane over the mouth of the fork. Doesn't have to be much, it just assists in getting the oil seal on. Okay, so new fork seal. I'm actually going to lubricate the inner and outer on the fork seal. These do go in pretty hard, guys. I managed to get the first one in, so now I'm going to put a little bit more grease. Okay, so again, top side up on the fork seal. Slide it down. Push it in evenly around with your fingers so that it sits flat. Okay. Now the hard part. 41mm fork seal driver. This does take some force, guys. You cannot just sally this. It's not going to magically slide into place. You do have to hit this fairly hard. We'll start easily. Okay, so this one slid into place a lot easier, and I think it's because I lubricated the outer rim of the fork seal, not just the inner rim. So I could see it's down sitting far enough now where it's sitting under the locking ring. So I'm pretty sure it's seated as far as it's supposed to be seated. I'm no expert, but I see the locking ring goes there. It makes sense. It needs to be seated under the locking ring. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is reinstall the clips that were removed in, I guess, video 2, which was the disassembly of the forks. We're just going to try to reinstall the clips, slide them down the fork tube. The groove is there, but you need to pinch. You need to pinch the ring, and you need to slide it down the tube. And it will lock in place. It will sit in the channel that it's designed to sit to in the fork. That one actually sat in very easy, guys. I could see it's actually seated in the ring spot that is made for it. Okay, so that is good. Ring number 1 is done. That could have been the easy fork though, who knows. Ring number 2. So same thing, to get it kind of in the channel, you could kind of squeeze the ends a little bit to kind of get it fitted. And then you can kind of push it down with a small flathead screwdriver the rest of the way. And again, this one actually seated very well. I could see it is in the channel. So the second locking ring is in as well. That was actually pretty easy, guys. It's a small component. It's very soft. It's very easy to manipulate, maneuver into place. Alright, so it is the next day. There was a reason why I wanted to let these forks sit overnight. I saw from another person doing fork rebuilds that when they tighten the bolt, the bottom bolt on the fork, they wanted to give the thread locking compound a little bit of time to cure. So I have left the fork sitting overnight so that thread locking compound can cure in the dampening rod assembly. And now we're going to kind of clean the forks up again, and we're going to put on the dust seals from our Yamaha kit. Okay guys, so I'm going to extend the fork here, and again, I'm going to clean it. I'm going to spray some brake cleaner on. Give it a nice clean surface for our dust seal. Okay. So let's open up our dust seal from our kit. I'll put all the part numbers for the dust seals and the fork seals and the actual kit in the description below the video. So without getting the fork dirty, I'm just going to slide the seal on. Okay, now I'm going to push this fork dust seal in just with my fingers as far as I can, and then we are going to use the hammer, the slide hammer, to just push it down a little bit. Okay, so let's tap it in. You can look around the edge of your seal or your dust shield to see if it's down. And it's looking pretty good. It looks like it's seated very well. So there's the first fork done. Let's do the same on the next. So again, clean the fork. Okay, new dust seal. It only goes in one way, guys. You can't even screw this one up. Slide it on the fork. Push it down as much with your fingers as you can. And then slide hammer time. Alright, just like that, guys, there you go. So, fork seals are in, bushings are in, ring clips are in, dust seals are in, and everything's been pounded down with the 41mm fork seal driver. So, we know everything's in the right place, everything's tight. Let's get some liquid in the forks. Alright, let's get the fork oil in. I've pre-filled a 16-ounce measuring cup with the fork oil I purchased, which is a Bel-Ray 10 weight. So yeah, let's start pouring it in, guys. 16 ounces is the US measurement, and it's 16.68 imperial ounce. So 16 being the lowest number, I know we're safe. I don't know if this measuring cup is the US ounce or the imperial ounce, but either way, 16 is safe. So it wants you to compress the fork and expand the fork a couple times so that the oil, it all filters down into the bottom end of the fork. You want to do this very gently or you could get a face full of fork oil, so don't be too aggressive, guys. Alright, so this is the fork weight that I've chosen for the fork rebuild. Now the manual calls, I believe, it says fork weight 01 or fork oil 01, which doesn't mean anything. It doesn't translate to any real numbers. From what the dealer was telling me, fork weight 01 or fork oil 01 is equivalent to a 5-weight oil. We're going to try a 10-weight oil in the forks just to see how the bike responds. The suspension in the FZ6R is a little bit bouncy. It is a little bit soft in my opinion. So we're going to try a 10-weight and we're going to see what happens. Alright, so after a couple of compressions, guys, of the fork, there is a measurement. They say that the fork oil should be 115 millimeters from the top of the fork. So I just have a little measuring tape here. Now the thing is, it doesn't really start, the end doesn't start at 0. So I'm just going to dip it down the fork. We're just checking specs essentially. Okay, 115 is about there. And it looks about right, guys. I mean, I don't know. Like, it probably doesn't have to be that perfect. But these are just the specs that Yamaha calls for. So we're going to try to follow the spec. Okay, so our fork oil has kind of settled in the fork here. We can always add more oil if we need to once the forks are on the bike. It's not a huge deal. It's just a matter of taking the fork caps off. So let's pull the fork up. Let's extend the fork. Now it's time to drop in our spring. So remember, the compressed part of the spring is the top. Down she goes. You can actually lower your, you can just do this to kind of give yourself. So next is the washer. Again, probably rough side down as it's mating up with the spring. Now we'll extend the fork tube up. And we're going to put in our spring spacer. Again, I've washed all this stuff off. It's all been cleaned, so I'm not worried about anything contaminating. So I'm going to compress the spring, and then we're going to try to get the cap on. We don't have to have it tight, we just need to get it on. Just need to get it started to thread. Okay, so there we go. Our cap's going in. Again, I'm going to lube the O-ring. Just going to lube the O-ring up here on the fork cap. So 22mm socket, guys. Just snug your cap down. Doesn't have to be tight. Snug it down. We don't want any fork oil leaking out. We'll torque it later on. I'm pretty much just hand tightening this in, guys. It's really, I'm not torquing it hardly at all. Okay, so it came snug. So essentially our first fork is done. Feels pretty good, guys. There is I've got compression and rebound on the fork. Right, so that's the assembly process for the one fork, guys. So again, follow the exact same procedure for your second fork, and then you've got a pair. So that is the process on how to do a fork rebuild on a Yamaha FZ6R. Specifically, if you're doing fork seals and dust seals, that is part of the process. So that's how it's done, guys. Special shout out to my buddy Matt, who had the 41mm fork seal driver. He's got some cool videos, guys, on his YouTube channel, drones and lots of cool stuff, man. Check it out. And yeah, check out our sponsors, guys. Carbon Class Motorsports. Links are in the description below the video. 10% off with our online store with my discount code. Ride the 6, I believe it is. Anyways, links are in the description. Alright, guys, so the next step is putting it back on the bike, but I'm not going to show you that video. I did the disassembly video, so the reassembly video back to the bike is just the opposite, essentially. Do not forget to torque your bottom bolt. And don't forget to torque your fork caps. I can put those in the description as well. I'll include that. Hopefully this video helps you if you're working on your FZ6R. You can see the fork rebuild. It's not a simple 5-minute thing. It is fairly involved. It is fairly complicated, and it is fairly time consuming. Alright, guys, like, subscribe. If you're out there riding, ride safe. See you on the next one.